Hey guys, my name is Toby and welcome back to another very exciting Photoshop tutorial where today we're going to be taking a look at how to make an animated GIF. And let's just get this out of the way straight away. I say GIF, not GIF. I used to say GIF, but somebody pointed out to me at some point that actually if you look at what GIF stands for, it's an acronym for Graphics Interchange Format. And graphics is a hard G, so therefore I kind of swapped to saying GIF. So that's what I'm going to be using for the remainder of the video. So sorry about that if you're not a fan of GIF, but here we go. So there are two main ways to go about making a GIF, one of which is by taking a pre-existing video clip and simply converting it to a GIF so you can use it on the internet and all that sort of thing. And the other way is creating something that's a bit more like a frame animation where you're taking like still images or you're hand animating something or something like that. So we're going to look at both of them in this video. If you want to look at the video technique, please click here. Otherwise, just hang on a second and we'll jump straight into creating a frame animation. Okay, so in order to make a frame animation, the first thing we need is a new document. So I'm going to go ahead and press Command N and just hit enter. And now we need something to animate. So just to kind of give you an idea of how this process works, I'm just going to create a ball over here in the top left hand corner. Now to animate this, we need to open up another tab, and that is the timeline tab. So we need to go up to Window and then down here to Timeline and open up this. So now what we need to do is click this button down here in the middle that says Create Frame Animation. And this is going to give us the first frame of our GIF. Now, the way Photoshop basically handles this is that you create a frame, and then you create the next frame, and you can change something. And then it's going to be able to remember the different states that the image was in. So for example, we can click this button just here to create a new frame. And then with this frame here selected, we can move this ball around. So let's put it down here in the bottom right-hand corner. So now if we flick back and forth between these two frames, you can see it's kind of moved. Now, if we wanted to make it a smooth animation between them, you'll be glad to hear that you don't have to kind of move it a bit, take a frame, move it a bit, make a new frame and do all that. We can do it quite quickly using a process called tweening, or sometimes it's called interpolation, where basically we're going to get Photoshop to kind of work out what the in-between frames would be between position A and position B. So to do that, we need to, I'm going to hold Shift and I'm going to select these two frames together, so they're both highlighted. And then we need to click this button just here with the sort of the ball that's kind of fading out, which is going to open up our tweening menu. Now, what we've got here are a few options. So generally I would say you want it to do all layers, position, opacity effects and everything. Now you can pick the number of frames to add. So remember, this is going to add this many frames in between these two. And at the moment I have this set to 23. And the reason I think I've set that to 23 is that generally speaking, when you're talking about video, you get a certain number of frames per second. That's just the rate that things play back. So in the UK, generally speaking, the kind of standard frame rate that you tend to get is 25. If you're putting something on the internet, generally the internet uses 30 frames per second as its kind of baseline. So if we're doing 30 frames per second, you might want to put this to 28. And the reason is it's 28, whoops, not 38, 28 plus those two there will make this entire animation last for 1 second. So I'm going to hit OK. And now it's added a whole bunch of frames where if we now hit the play button, it animates smoothly between those 2 points. Pretty simple, right? So then what we can do is come down here to the end, we can add another new frame, and then in this new frame here, we can move the ball up, and then we can shift select these last 2 frames here, because we want to add frames in between this position and this position. Click the tween button, it's already set up, click OK, and there we go. So now, if we play this, it's going to go ba-dunk and up. Simple as that. Okay, so this isn't a particularly useful example of it, so let's take a look at a real world use for this sort of thing. So I've got 2 images here. We have a processed raw file, and then we also have the unedited version, so we've kind of got a before and after. And what we want to do is create a kind of a fade between these 2 files in an animated form. So let's go ahead and just copy this and paste it over here. And then what we're going to do is create a new frame animation, so you have to click this to start it. and then add a new frame. And then in this second frame here, we're just going to drop the opacity of this down to 0. And now we can go ahead and tween this. So let's add a whole bunch of frames. We'll just keep with our 28 frames since that's going to work pretty well. And now what we want to do is we can go ahead and do something a bit more clever. So the way that GIFs tend to work is they tend to loop. You can set them so they don't if you want it to play once, or even you can get it to actually set it so it'll do it a set number of times if that's something you would like to do. But generally speaking, you want to get it to loop continuously forever. So what's quite good is if you can make it loop in a way that's not jarring, so you can have it fade out back to the original, so it kind of plays a lot more smoothly. There's no like hard cut where the loop starts and ends. So in order to do that, we need to get it back to its original frame. So what we can do is add a new frame, and then in this new frame we can bring the opacity of this top layer back all the way up, and then we can shift select these two here and do the same thing again. So now if we play our frame animation, it's going to fade up to the correct one and then fade back down. Now the only thing I don't like about that is that it doesn't pause on the finished photo very long. It kind of just goes, it gets there and then it immediately starts fading back out again. So what we can do, because we know that about frame 30 is going to be our kind of our finish point, if you like, we can come to frame 30 and we can just add about 10 or so new frames. And they are just going to be static frames when nothing changes. So now when we play it, it's going to fade up, it's going to pause for a little bit, and then it's going to fade back down. And then the idea is that once it gets to this frame, it should then, without any jarring, because the first frame and the last frame are the same as each other, it will loop quite nicely. Okay, so now that we've done our little animation, we can go ahead and save this. Now I am going to give you one piece of top tip advice, if you like, and that is that at this point here, you should resize your image. Now the problem is that if we have a look at the size of this image by pressing Command-Alt-I or Control-Alt-I if you're on the PC, this is a colossally huge photo. And basically, when you're animating this, you've got to imagine, we've got 70 frames in this. Imagine your computer trying to process an image this size, but 70 of them at once, because that's effectively what it's doing. And basically, this would make even the most well-built, insane computers cry a little bit. So what you want to do is, before you go into the save dialog, because it's actually that process of opening up the save dialog where it starts to have a little bit of a heart attack, we're going to go ahead and resize this. So let's make it 500. Let's make it 500 pixels tall. Whoops. Hang on, not 5 and 8. We want 500 pixels by 333. Okay. So we're going to hit OK, and that's going to shrink that down to a much, much smaller picture. But now what we need to do is go up to File, and then you want to go to Export, and then you want to go to Save for Web Legacy. Now, Save for Web never used to be a legacy thing, and they've kind of replaced it with Export As. But the problem is that you can't seem, at least as far as I've tested, to export an animated GIF from that dialog. You can export a GIF, but it's just a still GIF. It's not actually animated. So we need to go to Save for Web. So once Save for Web opens, you want to go ahead and have a look at this dialog box that pops up. So let's just zoom in here quickly onto our image. There we go. And you're going to notice you've got a few different options up here. Now the most important option by a long way are the looping options. Now a lot of the time this will default to be on once, so you want to make sure this is set to forever. If you put it on other, it will give you the option to set it to be a set number of times if that's something you wanted to do, but generally speaking I would say you want to put it on forever. Now let's have a look at what some of these mean. I'm going to try and keep this brief. So basically the way that GIFs work is they kind of store inside of them the number of all the different colors that they are able to use. And basically this is all about kind of what colors they are and how they're seen. So there's a number of different compression options you've got. I find that for most things adaptive works quite well. Sometimes perceptual can look a little bit better. Sometimes it won't really make a difference like in this case, but you can sort of see it's changing what colors they are and sort of how they're spread out and that sort of thing. Now the other option we've got is to actually just limit the number of colors, because part of the problem with animated GIFs is they're quite big files, particularly because they're sort of normally destined for the internet, so you want to get them as small as they possibly could be. Down in the left hand corner here you have a few bits of information that kind of tell you sort of what sort of size your image is, and you can kind of set your you know, if you've got like 2 megabyte per second internet, it's going to take you 24 seconds to download this image, apparently, which doesn't make sense in my eyes, but there we go. But it's saying it's 4.5 megabytes at the moment, and I think we can get that a little bit smaller. So at the moment we're using all 256 colors. Now what you can do is you can drop this down to 128 colors, and you're going to notice a slight quality loss. A lot of the time it's not too bad. I mean, generally speaking, GIFs aren't the highest quality files in the first place. So that's something to consider. So I wouldn't, you know, if you're looking for a super high quality file, this is not going to be it. But it will, you know, they serve a purpose, I think. So dithering. Dithering is an interesting one. This is to do with the fact that a lot of monitors can't display all of the colors that they could do. So if you look up here, you can see we do have some banding here, but basically if we turn this off, the banding is going to be way worse. Now what dithering is doing, it's kind of using some clever trickery to help kind of smooth that out. Even though it's not great, it's still a lot better than what it was. So dithering, I would generally leave at 100%. You've got a few different options for dithering, but generally diffusion works quite well for most things. Don't worry about the matte and transparency and that sort of thing. The only other two that you kind of want to play around with, perhaps, if you're really struggling to get your file down in size, is the web snap and this one that's called lossy, which is not particularly helpful in terms of its name. Now, web snap is to do with the fact that web browsers are kind of set to deal with a certain set of colors, and it's easier for your file to be made smaller if it can use certain colors. Just limit itself to certain web colors. So if we start to bring this up, you're going to notice that the number of possible colors starts to go down, but also the quality of the file starts to go down significantly, to the point where you get something that looks like this. So, you know, you might be able to get away with bringing this up a little bit without any real big issues, and that can help shrink your file down, but generally, you know, I would leave that alone. Lossy, this is to do with the fact that it's basically how much lossy compression do you want to use. It's called lossy because it makes the file smaller by throwing information away, hence it loses it, hence lossy. So the problem with this though is that as you start to bring this up, you know, it starts to seriously degrade the quality of the file. Like if we put it on 100, it's going to be awful, I've got no doubts. Wait for it. There we go. It's like, it's almost not worth doing. So, you know, I think that for this 4.5 is pretty good. The best way to shrink it down is to change the image size. That would be my advice. But I think that's going to do it. So now we can hit save, and we can save this as puppy1.gif, and we'll hit save. And here we have our animated GIF, and as you can see, it fades up, stops for a second, and then fades back down, and then it will loop quite nicely. There's no jarring cut there, and you know, that's worked pretty well, I think. So just to give you a couple of real world examples of where I've used these are on my website, and as you can see, the one on the left and the one on the right are simple sort of fade in and outs, but the one in the middle is a little bit more complicated, and I did this in a very similar technique, but just turning on and off various different levels in the composite, so you can see it kind of builds up. So there's one smoke element, another, etc, etc. So you can make it fairly complicated if you want. So if you've got a video file and you want to convert it to a GIF, and this is something that I think a lot of people have started doing because Facebook will actually let you have a GIF as your profile image at the moment. So what you need to do is find your video footage and then just simply drag it into Photoshop, and this is going to automatically pop up the timeline window. Now this is going to look a little bit different than if we're doing a frame animation, because this is using the video editor mode of the timeline. So I've got this bit of footage here of my dog just enjoying herself in the garden, and there's a bit of this video that I want to turn into a GIF. Now the thing is, this is too long for the whole thing to be a GIF, so what we basically want is, there's a bit here where she yawns and then looks quite pleased with herself. So that's the section that we want to use. So what we need to do is, just using this timeline indicator, find out where she yawns. We'll just go a little bit before that. And then what we can do is we can actually just split this clip here and delete the first bit. I'm just going to click that and hit backspace or delete. And then we want to work out how long we want it to play for, so we can and there. So then we'll do the same thing again. We'll just cut that and then we'll delete the second half. So now we have our little clip of video that we want to use. Maybe we could go a little bit shorter. So if you don't want to cut things, you can actually just mouse over the end of the clip. It's going to change your cursor to this icon, and you can just manually drag things back a bit. So we want to try and get this as short as we can, just to make the file smaller. I think that's going to do. Now, it's important at this point to resize your image, and the reason is that this is currently HD videos. This is 1080p, but that's going to be too big for a GIF. And basically, the reason I say you want to do it at this point is because if you open up the GIF save dialog with a massive file, your computer will pretty much have a heart attack. My computer is a pretty fast machine and it would struggle to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to image size, and I'm going to bring this down, so let's make it 500 pixels. No, let's make it like 400 pixels tall. We'll do that. I'm going to hit OK. And it's going to warn you that transforming a video layer requires converting it to a smart object. Just hit OK, that's fine. So now we've shrunk this down a little bit, and what we're now going to do is press, sorry, we're not going to press, there is a keyboard shortcut, but I think it's important to know where this is in the menu. Go up to File, Export, and then you want to go to Save for Web. Now, this is pretty much the best way to do it. You could try and render this if you like, but I think that if you're trying to turn it into a GIF to put on the web, it's a little bit different than rendering a video. It doesn't quite give you the same options. So we go to Save for Web, and this will open up our Save for Web dialog box any second now. As you can see, my computer, which is quite beefy, is struggling to open this, even though we shrunk it down, so maybe we could make it a bit smaller. Okay, so we're going to have to do a little bit of work to get this down to a reasonable size. As you can see at the moment, it's 25 megabytes, which is enormous for something you're going to try and watch over the internet. So what we can do is we can have a play with some of these settings. Let's just zoom in on our clip here so we can see what it's doing. What we first of all want to do, and this is kind of the most important option, is the looping options. Now you want to make sure you set this to forever, unless you really only want it to play once, or you really only want it to play a certain number of times. Putting it on forever is fairly important, otherwise it's going to play once and then stop, and generally GIFs are quite short, so you want it to kind of play over and over and over again. So that being said, we now need to mess around with some of these settings to bring the file size down to something more reasonable. So the first thing we can do is we can drop the number of colors. So at the moment it's storing 256 different colors in this file. We can drop this down to 128. It's going to halve the number of colors, or halve, I should say. And here we go. And then you can see this table get cut in half. There we go. So that's dropped 4 meg off it already. Dithering is kind of an interesting one. So the more that you dither a file, the bigger it will be. So if you bring the dithering down slightly, it's going to start to make it smaller. Now dithering is to do with the fact that certain monitors can't display certain colors. So this is kind of a clever way of getting around it. It's a bit geeky, I won't really get into it, but basically the important thing you need to know is that if you look at the background here, you can see that's quite smooth with the dithering up. I mean, it's not great, but it's smooth. If we bring this down, it's going to start to band quite badly, which, you know, isn't the end of the world. The main subject is still looking pretty good, so maybe we could suffer a little bit of dithering loss. The other thing we've got here are some web snap options. Now this is to do with the fact that these are the colors that are embedded in the image. Now there are some that kind of default to the web, which if we can say, you know, tell the image to just use the ones that the internet uses, effectively is kind of what it's saying, then we can bring the file size down a little bit more. So maybe we can get to like 50%-ish, something like that. Yeah, that's not so bad. Hasn't done a huge amount. And then maybe we can bring up a little bit of compression. So this is going to start chucking information away from our image to try and bring this down. Now, what it might be is that this image is actually just still a little bit too big. But you can see we've got this down to sort of 11.5 megabytes now. Maybe if we make this 500 pixels wide. There we go. Just give this a second to think about it. Okay, and now we're down to 6 megabytes. So you can see that just dropping it down a couple of hundred pixels in sort of width has, near enough halved the file size. It does make quite a difference, and realistically, image size is still kind of the best way to reduce the file size of your image. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and hit save, and we're going to call this puppy2 GIF and hit save. And then if we have a look here, we have our little animated GIF all saved out and brilliant. Now, the thing with GIFs is you're never going to get phenomenal quality and a decent file size out of it. That's kind of the trade-off here. But, if you're looking to quickly turn something into a GIF, this is the best way to do it. So, thank you very much for watching. My name is Toby, and we'll see you next time.